Dylan Rounds has been a farmer since he was a little boy. From the time he could walk, he would try to keep up with his dad and grandpa as they worked outside. Dylan could drive a tractor by himself before most kids his age could ride a bike. When he was 10 years old, Dylan was growing pumpkin patches and sweet corn to sell. Citizens of the Rigby community knew every summer there would be Dylan sweet corn for sale under the county line overpass. Dylan attended Rigby High School and began farming grain a few years ago in the desert town of Lucin, Utah, near the Utah-Nevada border.
Dylan Rounds mysteriously disappeared on Memorial Day weekend, and his family is desperate for answers.
The family desperately searching for their missing 19-year-old son who lives in Lucin, Utah.
Authorities have ramped up their search for 19-year-old Dylan Rounds with a criminal investigation.
Where is Dylan Rounds? Is he just a missing person? Did an accident take place? Or is there something more going on in Lucin, Utah and Montello, Nevada? I'm your host, and welcome to the very first Unsolved Mysteries YouTube investigation, and we have quite the mystery for you today. So many strange things out of place: a negligent law enforcement agency, a convicted criminal stalker, a vigilante group, and a big secret Dylan is hiding. It's Saturday, May 28th at 6:51 local time. Dylan Rounds has just made a phone call to his grandmother from his farm to discuss his workday ahead. Near the end of this phone call, Dylan mentions to his grandmother that he anticipates some rain later on and he needs to put his grain truck in the shed. He says he'll call her back, but this is the last time that Dylan is heard from. Later that day at 3:41 p.m., Dylan's cell phone pings a tower for the last time.
So he speaks with a family member on the 28th of May.
Correct.
And that's the last contact anybody's had with him.
Correct.
Did he say anything unusual?
No, just said he had to get his grain truck in because it was raining.
That was it?
That was it.
So when did you realize something wasn't right?
So his grandmother sent some of the people out there she knew to go check on him because she hadn't heard back from him. And then we kind of put it together on Monday that nobody had spoken to him, because you would go 2 or 3 days without hearing from him. That's not uncommon. But he was always in contact with either Justin or myself or his grandmother or his friend JD. He was always in contact with someone. So it took, a day and a half to put together that he'd been in contact with no one.
So Monday comes around and Grandma asks people to go check on him at the farm.
So Grandma asked Sunday for people to go check on him at the farm. Monday is when we all went down and called search and rescue and the police out.
Once Dylan's mother makes it down to his farm, the search begins. They go through his trailer, they break into his truck, they call search and rescue, and the terror starts to set in. Dylan's mother notes that everything at first glance looks very normal. However, she or anyone else was unable to find Dylan's phone, his keys, his wallet, or his pistol. And to make this scene even more questionable, while going through the truck, Dylan's mother notices something strange.
So I got in the pickup to take it back to camp to Justin so Dylan's friend could drive it home. The seat was scooted up to the point I didn't even have to move it to drive it. Now, I'm 4'11", Dylan's 5'11", and he sits back far, and every time I've ever gotten Dylan's pickup, you can't reach the pedals, I can't. So I thought, well, maybe it's just the way the seat moves when you turn the pickup off, right? So I made a mark in the dust, turned it on, turned it off, and to where the seat went back, and it's not where it was at. So it wasn't just because somebody got out of the pickup and let it go back to a setting, it was placed there. His pickup was also in 4 low. So he had a new transmission put in his pickup this winter, and the transfer case got messed up, and his 4-wheel drive does not work. And Dylan knows this, his grandfather knows it, his father knows it, I know it. He's cussed it. The pickup was in 4 low. So whoever was driving the pickup thought they were putting it in 4-wheel drive, but the 4-wheel drive don't work.
The reason the 4-wheel drive clue is important to remember is because it had just been raining a substantial amount on Saturday. If anyone was driving Dylan's truck in the Utah desert any time during that weekend after a rain like that, they would have been fishtailing all over the place and slinging mud in every direction. A person who lives in a place like this would know that 4-wheel drive would help with some of these issues, but it doesn't make sense that Dylan would have turned it on purposefully. He knew it didn't work. So if the 4-wheel drive was turned on purposefully and the seat was in a position that Dylan wouldn't have put it in, that leaves us with our first major question. Who was in the truck? The last clue Dylan's mother leaves us is somewhat of a disturbing one. About 100 yards west of Dylan's farm, there is a dirt pile. Behind this dirt pile, just casually thrown on the ground, were Dylan's boots. To the parents, they find this heartbreaking only because they've always known Dylan to just have one pair of footwear, his boots. To them, this was a very eerie sign because in their minds, there was no way that their son just set out on foot, barefoot, into the desert. The nearest town is almost 20 miles away, and with a mountain standing in between Dylan and this town, they highly doubt he decided to make that trek. The leads with Dylan's mother, unfortunately, end here, and we're left scratching our heads as the family comb through the desert, coming up with more questions than answers, no matter which way they go. Luckily for Dylan and his mystery, his support chain has some more links. Dylan's grandfather presumably wanted to contribute more to finding out what happened to Dylan and hired a private investigator by the name of Jim Terry to investigate. When Jim Terry arrives in Utah, he attempts to call Dylan's parents multiple times while they allegedly refuse to answer all of his calls.
Were you hired by his mom?
No. That's a little bit of the problem here. The parents had a nasty divorce a few years ago. It was a horrible divorce. The mother and the father would not take my phone calls.
Working with what little he had, Jim started speaking to individuals locally that may have known Dylan.
I started digging into his lifestyle before he went missing. Didn't make sense. A 19-year-old wanting to live in the desert and start a farm and is wanting to do it since he was 9. I wanted to talk to any of his high school girlfriends, any of his friends, any people around his age, and there were none.
After a couple of conversations, Jim's able to conclude that Dylan has had a lot of communication with an individual named Kurt Wadsworth, who lives in Montello, Nevada, the nearby town.
He hung around a guy named Kurt Wadsworth. Kurt Wadsworth is a 60-year-old man who has 8 children and is estranged from the children, the majority of them, and his wife. This man lives in the area. His family is a bunch of local knuckleheads. They're drug addicts, they're pedophiles, they're criminals, and they're felons. This is all verified. Kurt Wadsworth was and is Dylan Rounds' friend. Now, I went back over Wadsworth's history as a brother named Troy Wadsworth, who's a registered sex offender. These people all live out in that area. I've had 2 really good leads on this. One of the leads involved a man who's a multimillionaire out there. He's an alpaca farmer. He got in contact with me and he let me into a tip on this case, which is that Dylan Rounds and the 2 Wadsworth brothers that are older, one of them's a sex offender, and several other of their friends were policing that area on their own late at night. They had their own little militia group, their own little vigilante group, and they were going around in that desert stopping people, pulling guns on people.
It's a common occurrence in these tiny towns with some criminal activity for community members to form groups of armed individuals to go out and patrol the lawless land that surrounds them. And that's exactly what we hear is happening from the private investigator Jim Terry in the case of Dylan Rounds. And now we know, Dylan Rounds has a social group. The criminal history of Kurt Wadsworth is lacking, but his brother Troy is no upstanding citizen, registered as a sex offender and a convicted stalker. Whether Dylan knew of Troy's criminal status is unknown, but Dylan was seemingly comfortable enough acting as an armed vigilante alongside of him. That amount of trust isn't earned easily, and the relationship between the brothers and Dylan seems like it needs to be looked into further. And just when we thought that this was weird enough, Jim drops a bombshell on the investigation.
I also found out that these 2 had a sexual relationship, okay? Dylan Rounds was gay. His family didn't know that. Boom! I could just tell you what that does to a bunch of farmers.
Jim has gained insight from none other than Kurt Wadsworth himself that he and Dylan have had an intimate relationship.
He was staying over at his trailer. I talked to Kurt Wadsworth. He said the boy stayed at his trailer continuously.
Kurt Wadsworth knowingly informed a private investigator that he had a close relationship with Dylan, and even told him that Dylan would stay the night at this trailer many times. While this does solidify Kurt's position as a suspect, the fact he is openly sharing this with an investigator is worth noting, as no one else in the town has shared this intimate detail. Shifting our lens to Kurt's brother Troy, it's apparent the family tree is beginning to wither.
Troy Wadsworth is a registered sex offender. He kidnapped a girlfriend of his and had her in a shed. He was busted for this. He had her in a shed, and he used her to lure 2 other women to this shed. We're talking about a shed, no plumbing, no kitchen. And
How long ago?
2018. And he had these women captive in this. Now, one of the women ran away barefoot. Basically, what they said is that he would put them in this trailer and he would exchange water and food for sexual favors. He also would take thumbtacks and put 2 gallons or a 5-gallon jug of water out there, put tacks in the water, and it would slowly drain. That was part of their torture. One of the women who had a daughter there got loose, made it to a post office, and they went and got these girls, and these girls basically would not testify against him. As soon as they had their advocates, as soon as they met with police, they basically just disappeared. And I'm trying to track those 3 women down. There is police reports about this, and that's why he only did a short amount of time, and it was for something like internet pornography or something. It wasn't even for capturing these women, because they wouldn't come out against him and say that that is what had happened.
Troy Wadsworth's criminal history is enough to qualify him as suspect number 2 in this investigation, but this disturbing history isn't our only lead.
Troy Wadsworth is not a very good guy. I also found out that in the last 2 weeks, Troy Wadsworth has nail marks, scratches up and down one of his arms.
Not only does Troy Wadsworth have a criminal history, but he also has defensive wounds in the form of scratches up and down one of his arms. I was able to find these more recent photos of Dylan, and it was clear to see that Dylan either bites his nails or keeps them very short. This means that it would be unlikely Dylan's nails would be able to leave wounds that lasted over 10 days. Is Troy back to raping women? Or are these wounds actually a clue as to what happened to Dylan? With the Wadsworth brothers and their personal relationships with Dylan, one might think their role in Dylan's disappearance is obvious, but our suspect pool doesn't end here. Earlier on in the search for Dylan, the YouTuber Heavy D Sparks made his way out to Dylan's farm to meet the family and perform an aerial search in his helicopter. At one point during his video, Dylan's mother brings up an interesting person who seems to have a connection to Dylan.
Out here we've been getting so much information from locals, and it's just a circle. It's none of it's been true. Nothing we have chased him.
Where are all the squatters at from here then? So
Everywhere.
just everywhere?
Everywhere, this whole valley.
Is there a few that we're thinking have the most to do with it?
The ones that are right here, the one that lives up here, and the one that was helping him.
The old grumpy guy over here?
The old grumpy guy. And
they were actually working for Dylan, and I don't think they, like taking orders from a 19-year-old to begin with. So.
Yeah. And he's not talking to anybody, not cooperating with.
He talks.
He talks, but it's just
doesn't give him much information.
No, it's no information.
Come in the morning, see what our plan is, and then give us a few hints on where to go, and we spend all day in the wrong place.
Right.
It turns out that this disgruntled ex-employee of Dylan's, Dawn, was actually the first person Dylan's grandmother called to check on him after she hadn't heard back from him.
Saturday, when Karen didn't hear back from him after putting the truck in, she got a hold of Dawn Sunday morning and said, go check Dylan, blah, blah. They said, Dawn went and checked. He said the camper's, his pickup's locked. We can't tell if his guns are in there. He hasn't been here. So then he went and got Jim, and they went and looked again. So I guess.
So the grandma called Dawn first?
Yeah.
Yes. And then Dawn and Jim were the first ones to look?
Yes. And so throughout this, I have Karen thinking back on it, like, did they say anything like, don't worry about it, he'll be fine, everything's good, so she didn't alert me or Justin, his dad.
Why would Dawn think that Dylan locking all of his property up and leaving it behind was normal and nothing to worry over? Another individual suspected of knowing more than he's telling. Our last and final clue in this investigation is the most concerning one, as it nearly guarantees that there was foul play in the case of Dylan's disappearance.
There was also a gun in Dylan Rounds' trailer that the first 2 days the parents went in there, which I was speaking with the family but was not retained at the time, was not there. When they checked the trailer a day or two later, the gun was in the bathroom. Somebody brought that gun back.
1 man missing, 3 suspects. Do you think any of these individuals had anything to do with the disappearance of Dylan Rounds? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching this unsolved mystery. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and we'll see you next time.